The rain didn't fall. It seeped. It crept from a bruised charcoal sky and settled onto the city, turning brickwork dark and asphalt into a slick, black mirror. For 10-year-old Maya, huddled in the recessed doorway of a defunct print shop, the rain was a cold, constant thief, stealing what little warmth she had left. Her jacket, a threadbare hand-me-down, was more of a memory of protection than actual protection. She pulled her knees to her chest, making herself smaller, a habit born from a world that had taught her visibility was a liability. Across the street, the skeleton of a new luxury apartment building clawed at the clouds. It was a place of noise and motion during the day, but now, in the gray wash of late afternoon, it was quiet save for the rhythmic drip of water from steel beams. A single black car, sleek and silent as a panther, was parked at the curb. A man in a tailored suit stood beside it, his polished shoes an insult to the grimy sidewalk. This was Mr. Sterling, a name she'd learned from discarded newspapers that served as her blankets. He was the city's golden boy, the developer transforming this forgotten neighborhood into something new, something expensive. To Maya, he was just a shape, a silhouette of power she knew to avoid. He was talking to a foreman, his smile a flash of white that didn't reach his eyes. His voice was a low murmur, too distant to be understood, but its tone carried a chilling finality. Maya wasn't just watching, she was studying. Survival had sharpened her senses into fine-tipped instruments. She noticed things others missed. The way the foreman, a big man with calloused hands, seemed to shrink in Sterling's presence. The way Sterling's gestures were sharp, precise, like a surgeon's cuts. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a cigarette, placing it between his lips. He then retrieved a lighter, a heavy ornate thing of polished silver. He flicked it open, and for a brief moment, a tiny, defiant flame danced against the gloom. The lighter had a design etched into its side, an animal of some kind. He lit his cigarette, snapped the lighter shut with a metallic click that echoed in the damp air, and slipped it back into his pocket. But his movement was too casual, too distracted. The lighter missed the pocket's opening, falling silently onto the wet ground near the curb. Neither man noticed. They finished their conversation, shook hands, Sterling's grip firm, the foreman's reluctant, and Sterling climbed back into his car. The engine purred to life, and the vehicle slid away from the curb, its red taillights bleeding into the rain-streaked darkness. The foreman lingered for a moment, then turned and walked back onto the construction site. His shoulders slumped. Maya remained perfectly still, her breath a small, white cloud in the cold. Her gaze was fixed on the spot where the lighter had fallen. It lay there, a glint of silver in a puddle, a small, forgotten secret in the vast, indifferent city. A deep, instinctual fear, colder than the rain, coiled in her stomach. It wasn't about the lighter itself. It was about the man. It was about the carelessness of his power, the way he could drop something so valuable and not even notice, the way the world seemed to bend around him, erasing his mistakes. She knew, with a certainty that had no language, that a man that careless with his own things would be infinitely more careless with a person, especially a person no one would miss. She had spent months learning the art of being invisible, of being a ghost in the machine of the city, but seeing that small silver object lying abandoned sparked a flicker of something else inside her, something that felt dangerously like purpose. The world was full of things people lost, but this felt different. This felt like a clue, a warning. She didn't know what it meant, not yet, but the image was seared into her mind. The man, the smile, and the silver wolf lying forgotten in the rain. Her small world, defined by the borders of this alley and the gnawing ache of hunger, had just been breached. The danger was no longer a vague, shapeless entity. It now had a face, a name, and a forgotten silver lighter lying in a puddle across the street. And she was the only one who had seen it fall. Maya's world had been dismantled piece by piece, like a complex engine stripped for scrap. It started with the squeal of tires and the sickening crunch of metal, a sound that had echoed in her dreams for 2 years. Her father, Daniel, had been a mechanic, a magician with a wrench and a grease-stained smile. He could diagnose an engine by its cough, a transmission by its whine. Their garage, smelling of oil and steel and his cheap coffee, had been her sanctuary. He'd taught her the difference between a socket and a spanner, the patient art of listening to what a machine was trying to tell you. "Everything has a voice, May," he used to say, his hands gently guiding hers as she tightened a bolt. "You just have to be quiet enough to hear it." He had given her a small, perfectly weighted combination wrench for her 8th birthday. It was her most precious possession, tucked safely in the inner pocket of her jacket, its cool metal a constant, tangible link to him. After the accident, the silence in the garage became a deafening roar. The hospital bills arrived like a relentless tide, first in single envelopes, then in thick, menacing stacks. Her mother, a woman who had always seemed to float through life on a cloud of gentle optimism, grew brittle, then transparent, then gone. She left a note on the kitchen table one morning, the words, "I'm sorry," looped in a tear-smudged script. Then came the eviction notice, a stark, official paper taped to their front door. The world of predictable things, dinner at 6, homework at the kitchen table, the familiar growl of the garage door opening, crumbled into dust. The foster system was next. It was a place of clean floors and quiet, sterile rooms run by people with kind, tired eyes who spoke in acronyms and managed caseloads. They gave her food, a bed, and clothes that weren't hers. But they couldn't see her. They saw a file, a statistic, a tragic box to be checked. The other children in the home moved around her like ghosts, each trapped in their own private snow globe of loss. Maya learned that silence was a shield. If she didn't speak, she couldn't say the wrong thing. If she didn't make eye contact, she couldn't be asked questions she couldn't answer. She became an expert at fading into the background, a shadow on the wall. But the silence she cultivated for protection began to feel like a cage. One night, she packed her small backpack with her father's wrench, a half-eaten bag of crackers, and the one faded photograph she had of her parents, smiling in the summer sun. She slipped out a window that had been left unlocked and walked until the suburbs melted into the harsh electric glow of the city. The streets were a different kind of institution, with their own unspoken rules and invisible hierarchies. But here, at least, the danger was honest. It didn't pretend to be for her own good. She learned the rhythms of the city, when the bakeries threw out the day-old bread, which library vents blew warm air, which alleys were dead ends. She learned to read people not by their words, but by their posture, their pace, the tension in their shoulders. She survived on the skills her father had taught her, though not in the way he had intended. His lessons in patience and observation were now used to watch for threats, not to diagnose a faulty alternator. His insistence on precision allowed her to gauge the exact moment to slip away unnoticed. She was a mechanic of her own survival, constantly tightening the loose bolts of her fragile existence. Her isolation was a fortress she had built around her grief. To let someone in would be to risk another loss, another crumbling foundation. So she watched from the periphery, an unseen observer in a world that had forgotten her. The memory of her father's hands, strong and sure, was both a comfort and a constant ache. He had taught her how to fix things, but he had never taught her how to fix a life that had been so thoroughly broken. The small wrench in her pocket was a reminder of a time when she had a place, a purpose. Now, it just felt heavy. The clubhouse of the Road Guardians Motorcycle Club was a former auto body shop, a cavernous space that smelled perpetually of leather, motor oil, and strong coffee. It was less a headquarters and more a sanctuary. Here, the thundering roar of their bikes gave way to a quieter, more deliberate rhythm. The Guardians were not the lawless degenerates of popular imagination. They were a brotherhood, forged not in chaos, but in a shared code of discipline and uncompromising loyalty. Their president, a man known universally as Breaker, ran the club with the steady hand of a senior battlefield commander. A former Army Ranger, his face was a roadmap of hard miles and harder decisions. The lines around his eyes spoke of vigilance, the set of his jaw of resolve. He moved with a quiet economy, every gesture imbued with purpose. He was currently observing his 17-year-old son, Cody, who was struggling to reseat the gas tank on his customized Dyna. "Patience, son," Breaker said, his voice a low rumble that cut through the clatter of tools. "Force it, and you'll strip the bolt. Listen to the machine. It'll tell you when it's right." Cody grunted in frustration but eased up, aligning the brackets with more care. He was a good kid, but he possessed the impatience of youth. A firebreaker was constantly trying to temper into a focused flame. Scattered around the garage were the other core members, each a pillar of the club's foundation. Deacon, the club's sergeant-at-arms, sat methodically polishing a piece of chrome until it shone like a mirror. A man of deep, quiet faith who had found his ministry on two wheels, he was the club's moral compass. His past was a tapestry of mistakes and redemption, and he believed fervently that strength was measured by the shield you offered, not the sword you wielded. "A clean bike is a sign of a clear mind," he'd often say, his words carrying the weight of a sermon. Then there was Ghost, the club's enforcer and intelligence officer. Lean and wiry, he could move through a crowd without causing a ripple. He rarely spoke, but when he did, his words were stripped down to their essential, often brutal, truth. He had spent years in special operations, a life that had taught him the art of seeing without being seen, a skill he now used to watch over his brothers and their territory. He saw the world in threats and assets, and his primary mission was ensuring the former never touched the latter. Breaker's own past was the bedrock of the Guardian's code. He had lost his younger brother in a firefight in Afghanistan, a loss that had hollowed him out and then rebuilt him with a new, unshakable purpose. He had failed to protect his own blood, a failure he had sworn he would never repeat. The Guardians were his family now, and their code was simple and absolute. We protect our own, and we protect those who cannot protect themselves. This wasn't a suggestion. It was scripture. It meant providing security for a local women's shelter, organizing toy drives at Christmas, and quietly ensuring that the predators who preyed on the weak in their city found their lives becoming inexplicably and profoundly difficult. They were a paradox. Men who looked like the danger society feared, yet served as the unseen guardians against it. Their leather cuts, adorned with the club's patch of a stoic, iron-jawed wolf, were not a symbol of rebellion, but a uniform of responsibility. They understood that true power wasn't in intimidation, but in presence. It was the quiet promise that if you crossed a line, you would find them standing on it, an immovable wall of leather, steel, and unwavering resolve. As Cody finally seated the gas tank with a satisfying click, Breaker gave a slight nod of approval. "See? Just had to listen." In this garage, amidst the tools and the scent of gasoline, the broken pieces of their past lives were reassembled into something stronger, something with purpose. They were fixers of machines, and, when necessary, of broken lives. The breakdown was sudden and irritating. One moment, Cody was enjoying the throaty growl of his Dyna on a clear stretch of road. The next, it was a sickening clatter followed by a loss of power. He coasted to a stop, the bike sputtering into silence. He swore under his breath, the sound swallowed by the cavernous quiet of the industrial street. He knew the sound. The drive chain was loose, slapping against its guard. A simple fix if he had his tools. He'd left his roll pack at the clubhouse, an oversight born of teenage haste. He pulled out his phone and sent a text to his dad. Chain tensioner came loose, stuck on 9th and Industrial. The reply was immediate. Stay put. On my way. Cody leaned against his bike, frustrated and embarrassed. He hated making rookie mistakes. As he waited, a movement in a nearby alley caught his eye. A small figure detached itself from the shadows of a recessed doorway. It was a kid, a girl, no older than 10 or 11. She was thin and wore a jacket that was several sizes too big, her face smudged with dirt. She moved with a hesitant, watchful grace, like a stray cat deciding if the world was friend or foe. She stopped a few feet away, her eyes not on him, but on the bike. Her gaze was intense, analytical. Your primary chain tensioner bolt is backing out, she said. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but it was clear and confident. Cody stared at her, taken aback. What? The bolt, she repeated, pointing a small, grimy finger toward the engine casing. I can hear the slap. You need to tighten it before it shears off and wrecks your primary drive. She spoke the mechanical terms with an unnerving, matter-of-fact fluency. He was about to dismiss her, to tell her to get lost, but there was something in her eyes. A deep, old seriousness that didn't belong on a child's face. Before he could respond, she unzipped her jacket and reached into an inner pocket, pulling out a small steel combination wrench. It looked old, but well cared for. She knelt by the bike, her movements deft and sure. She found the bolt head instantly, fitted the wrench, and gave it a firm, steady turn. 1, 2, 3 clicks of the ratchet. It's a temporary fix, she said, not looking up. You need to put some Loctite on it when you get back to your shop or it'll happen again. Vibration's a killer on these. She stood up, wiping her hands on her jeans, and tucked the wrench back into her jacket. She had fixed in 30 seconds a problem that had left him stranded. Just then, the deep, synchronized rumble of multiple Harleys filled the air. Breaker, followed by Deacon and Ghost, pulled up. They dismounted in a fluid, practiced motion, their presence instantly changing the atmosphere of the street. Breaker's eyes took in the scene. His son, the silent bike, and the small waifish girl standing beside it. What's going on, Cody? Breaker asked, his gaze settling on Maya. Her, Cody said, still slightly stunned. She fixed it. Breaker looked at Maya, his expression unreadable. He saw the grime, the worn-out clothes, but he also saw the intelligence in her eyes and the way she held herself, poised for flight. He saw a survivor. That right? He asked her gently. Maya just nodded, her eyes darting between the 3 large men. At that moment, a sleek black car drove past them down the street. As it passed under a streetlight, Maya flinched. It was a tiny, almost imperceptible motion, a slight tightening of her shoulders, a quick intake of breath. But Breaker saw it. Ghost saw it too. Breaker followed her gaze to the retreating car. You know who that is? He asked, his voice low. Maya shook her head, but her fear was a palpable thing. I saw him, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Across the street, he dropped his lighter, the one with the silver wolf on it. The detail was so specific, so strange. It was a key, but to a lock they hadn't yet found. Breaker looked from the terrified child to the empty street where the car had disappeared. The simple problem of a loose chain tensioner had just become infinitely more complicated. He knew, with the same gut instinct that had kept him alive in combat, that this small, courageous act of kindness from a forgotten child was about to pull them all into something much, much darker. The diner was a local institution, a place where deals were made over chipped coffee mugs and lukewarm pie. Breaker, Deacon, and Ghost slid into a booth in the back, the worn vinyl sighing under their weight. They didn't speak, but a silent communication flowed between them. They had left Maya with Cody back at the clubhouse, in the care of the club's old ladies, the wives and partners who were as much a part of the family as the men. She was safe, fed, and warm for the first time in what was clearly a very long time. Breaker's mind was replaying the scene on the street, the girl's mechanical knowledge, her quiet competence, and the stark, undiluted fear in her eyes when that black car passed. The silver wolf lighter. It was a small, seemingly insignificant detail, but his instincts screamed that it was the linchpin. A few minutes later, the diner's bell chimed, and Mr. Sterling walked in. He was the picture of civic pride, shaking hands with the owner, smiling at the waitress. He commanded the room without raising his voice. He settled into a booth near the front, holding court with the city councilmen. This was the moment. Breaker slid out of his booth and walked toward Sterling, his boots making a soft, deliberate sound on the linoleum floor. Deacon and Ghost remained behind, their presence a silent, watchful anchor. They didn't move, they didn't stare, but every person in the diner was suddenly aware of them. Breaker stopped at Sterling's table. "Mr. Sterling," he said, his voice calm and even. Sterling looked up, his politician smile firmly in place, though his eyes were cold and appraising. He took in Breaker's leather cut, the club patch, and his expression shifted to one of faint, patronizing amusement. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone implying Breaker was something unpleasant he'd have to wipe off his shoe. "My name is Breaker. I'm with the Road Guardians," Breaker said, ignoring the condescension. "We have a clubhouse down by the industrial park, near your new construction site." A flicker of something, annoyance perhaps, crossed Sterling's face before being smoothed over by his practiced charm. "Ah, yes, the bikers. I'm aware of your group." The word group was layered with disdain. "It's a rough neighborhood," Breaker continued, his voice never rising. "Lots of kids with nowhere to go. They hang around places like that construction site. It can be dangerous." Sterling leaned back, steepling his fingers. "I assure you, our site is perfectly secure. We have the highest safety standards. The welfare of this community, including its children, is my top priority." The words were smooth, polished, and utterly meaningless. It was a press release in human form. Breaker held his gaze. "That's good to hear. You'd hate for anything to get lost, or for anyone to get hurt." He paused, letting the silence stretch. Someone might lose something valuable, for instance, something personal, like a nice silver lighter, one with, say, a wolf on it. The change in Sterling was infinitesimal, but to a man trained to spot a sniper on a distant ridge, it was as loud as a gunshot. The muscles in his jaw tightened. His smile became a thin, hard line. The mask of the benevolent developer had slipped, revealing the cold, predatory core beneath. "I have no idea what you're talking about," Sterling said, his voice losing its warmth, becoming flat and sharp. "And I'd appreciate it if you and your friends took your business elsewhere. You're disturbing the other patrons." Breaker didn't move. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't made a threat. He had simply stood there and held up a mirror, and Sterling had not liked the reflection. "We're just finishing our coffee," Breaker said softly. He gave a slight nod and walked back to his booth. The confrontation had been quiet, almost mundane, but a line had been drawn. The power in the room had shifted. Sterling, for all his money and influence, was visibly unnerved. He quickly finished his meeting, threw some cash on the table, and left without making eye contact with the back of the diner. As the door chimed behind him, Deacon looked at Breaker. "Well?" "He's dirty," Breaker said, his voice grim. "And that little girl saw something she wasn't supposed to see." The truth was no longer a suspicion. It was a certainty. And the road guardians had just put themselves squarely between a very dangerous man and his most vulnerable witness. The first call Breaker made was to Ghost. "Watch him," was all he said. Ghost didn't need further instruction. He was a phantom melting into the urban landscape. He set up a discreet observation post in a derelict building overlooking Sterling's main construction site, a place that offered a clear view of the temporary offices and the constant flow of trucks and workers. He watched, he documented, he waited. The second call was harder. It was to Marcus Harding, a detective with the city police and an old friend from Breaker's Army days. They had a complicated relationship, built on shared trauma and a mutual, if grudging, respect. "Marcus, I need you to listen," Breaker began, skipping the pleasantries. He laid out the story, the homeless girl, the broken-down bike, the fear in her eyes, the mention of the silver wolf lighter, the confrontation in the diner. Harding was silent on the other end of the line for a long time. "Let me get this straight, John," he finally said, using Breaker's real name. "You want me to open a file on one of the most powerful men in this city based on the gut feeling of a biker and the word of a homeless kid who saw him drop a lighter?" The skepticism was thick in his voice. "Her name is Maya," Breaker said, his tone firm. "And yes, that's what I'm asking. Just look. Run his name quietly. See what shakes loose. I've got a bad feeling about this, Marcus. A real bad one." "I'll see what I can do," Harding sighed, the sound of a man who knew he was about to step into a world of political trouble. "But no promises, and your people stay out of it. No vigilante stuff." "My people will be ghosts," Breaker promised. Back at the clubhouse, Maya was slowly beginning to thaw. She had been given a warm meal, a clean set of clothes that belonged to Cody's cousin, and a small cot in a quiet back room. She was still mostly silent, but she watched everything with her intelligent, perceptive eyes. Breaker's wife, Sarah, a woman with a calm and gentle strength, gave her a sketchbook and some colored pencils. "Sometimes it's easier to draw things than to say them," she said softly. For a day, Maya didn't touch them. Then, on the second morning, she began to draw. She didn't draw flowers or houses. She drew the construction site. She drew it with a startling, architectural precision, labeling the different areas. She drew the temporary office building in the back, the one with the blacked-out windows. She drew a detailed picture of Mr. Sterling's face from memory, capturing the coldness in his eyes. Then she began to draw other children. Faces of kids she had seen on the streets, kids who had disappeared. She drew a boy named Leo, who used to panhandle near the bus station. She drew a girl named Sophia, who always wore a red scarf. Beneath each face she wrote their name in careful blocky letters. Ghost's reports started coming in. They were concise and chilling. He observed late-night deliveries to the construction site, not of building materials but of vans with no markings. He saw Sterling meeting with known criminals, men Harding had on his radar for human trafficking. Most disturbingly, he saw kids who looked scared and lost, being led into that same back office Maya had drawn, the one with the blacked-out windows. They would go in, but they wouldn't always come out. Breaker took Maya's drawings and Ghost's surveillance notes to Harding's office. He laid them out on the detective's cluttered desk. Harding stared at the drawings, his expression shifting from skepticism to professional focus. He picked up the drawing of the boy, Leo. "Leo Martinez," he said, his voice quiet. "His foster parents reported him as a runaway 6 weeks ago. We have a file on him." He then pointed to the girl with the red scarf. "Sophia Reyes. Disappeared from a group home a month back." He looked at Breaker, the last vestiges of his doubt gone, replaced by a cold fury. "These aren't just drawings. This is testimony." The pieces were clicking into place. The vague unease had solidified into a horrifying picture. Sterling wasn't just a corrupt developer. He was using his construction site as a hub, a transit point for a child trafficking network preying on the city's most invisible and vulnerable residents. The institutional gears, so often rusted shut by indifference and bureaucracy, began to grind into motion. Harding pulled the files on every missing child in the city from the last year. He cross-referenced the names Maya had provided. He started building a case, brick by painstaking brick. And it all started because a little girl with a wrench wasn't afraid to step out of the shadows. The evidence was no longer just a feeling. It was a stack of drawings, a set of surveillance photos, and a growing list of names. The turning point came when Harding realized he needed more than just surveillance and drawings. He needed probable cause to get a warrant for Sterling's office. The risk of tipping him off was too high for a standard investigation. They needed to apply pressure, to make Sterling feel cornered, to force a mistake. That's when Breaker came up with a plan. It was audacious, public, and perfectly legal. He put out the word to every Road Guardians chapter within a 100-mile radius. The message was simple. Community safety ride, 9th and Industrial. Be present, be silent, be disciplined. Within 24 hours, the response was overwhelming. They came from all over the state, a rolling tide of chrome and steel. They weren't a mob, they were an army. Over 100 motorcycles descended on the industrial park, their engines a low, collective growl that was more intimidating than any outright threat. They didn't block traffic, they didn't shout or protest. They simply began to circle the block that housed Sterling's main office and the entrance to his construction site. They rode in a slow, orderly, and continuous loop, 24 hours a day. The effect was immediate and profound. The quiet, forgotten street was suddenly the center of attention. The constant, disciplined presence of the bikers was unnerving. It was a silent, leather-clad accusation. Local news crews, drawn by the spectacle, arrived. The first reports were sensationalist, full of cliches about biker gangs laying siege to a local business. Sterling, ever the master of public relations, gave a statement decrying the intimidation tactics of a lawless motorcycle gang, painting himself as the victim. But the Guardians didn't take the bait. They didn't speak to the press. They just rode. Their quiet discipline began to change the narrative. People in the community started to take notice. A teacher from a nearby school, Ms. Albright, recognized the face of Sophia Reyes from a missing child poster she'd put up herself. She saw the bikers, saw the news reports, and connected the dots. She called Detective Harding's office, her voice trembling but firm, to give a statement about Sophia, corroborating the timeline of her disappearance with the start of Sterling's project. Her call was the first of many. Other community members, emboldened by the Guardian's unyielding presence, began to come forward. A night watchman from a neighboring warehouse reported seeing the unmarked vans. A food truck vendor recalled serving kids who looked terrified in the company of Sterling's foreman. The trickle of information became a flood. Supporters began to show up, bringing coffee and donuts for the silent riders. They held up signs that said, "We see you and protect our kids." The public reckoning was shifting away from the bikers, and focusing squarely on Sterling. The silent vigil had become a magnet for the community's conscience. Inside his office, Sterling was beginning to unravel. The constant, low rumble of the engines was a nerve-shredding soundtrack to his crumbling empire. He made frantic calls to his political allies, but they were distancing themselves, wary of the growing scandal. Harding, armed with the new witness statements, now had everything he needed. He went before a judge and laid out the case. The initial tip, the surveillance, Maya's drawings, and the flood of corroborating testimony from the community. The judge, looking at the mountain of evidence, didn't hesitate. He signed the warrant. The public spectacle, orchestrated by Biker, had done exactly what it was supposed to do. It had created a space where the truth could no longer be ignored. It had turned the community's passive onlookers into active participants. The roar of their engines had been a call to arms, and the city was finally listening. The reckoning was no longer a possibility. It was an inevitability. The raid was executed with swift, overwhelming force. Harding's tactical team, briefed and ready, hit the construction site office just before dawn. They breached the door to the back room, the one with the blacked-out windows from Maya's drawings. The scene inside was even worse than they had feared. They found several children, including Leo Martinez, huddled in a small, windowless room, scared and malnourished. They also found ledgers, computers, and burner phones, a treasure trove of evidence detailing the logistics of a vast and monstrous trafficking operation. Sterling was arrested at his luxurious home, pulled from his bed in silk pajamas. The mask of the respected philanthropist was gone, replaced by a face of pure, venomous rage. The story exploded across every news channel. The biker siege was suddenly recontextualized as a heroic vigil. The road guardians were no longer thugs, they were heroes. But for Maya, the hardest part was yet to come. The district attorney explained that her testimony was crucial. She was the one who had made the initial connection, the one whose courage had started it all. The thought of facing Sterling in a courtroom was terrifying. The night before her testimony, she couldn't sleep. Biker found her in the clubhouse kitchen, staring into a mug of hot chocolate. "You don't have to do this if you can't," he said gently, sitting across from her. "They have other evidence." Maya looked at him, her small face etched with a gravity far beyond her years. "My dad used to say," she began, her voice a near whisper, "that some bolts you have to tighten all the way, or the whole thing will fall apart again." She took a deep breath. "I have to finish it." The next day, when Maya walked into the courtroom, she wasn't alone. The public gallery was filled. Every single seat was occupied by a member of the Road Guardians, their leather cuts creating a sea of black. They weren't there to intimidate the jury or the judge. They were there for her, a silent, immovable wall of support at her back. When she took the stand, her hands were trembling. She looked out at the faces in the gallery and saw Biker, Deacon, Ghost, and Cody. She saw Sarah, who gave her a small, encouraging nod. Her trembling stopped. Her voice, when she began to speak, was small but steady. She told the court everything. She described the alley, the rain, and the black car. She described the way Mr. Sterling looked, the coldness in his smile. She described the silver wolf lighter falling to the ground. She identified the other children from photographs, giving their names, telling the court where she had last seen them. Sterling's high-priced lawyer tried to tear her apart on cross-examination. He painted her as an unreliable witness, a street kid with a grudge, a fantasy-prone child. "You're just a homeless girl, aren't you?" he sneered. "What could you possibly know?" Maya looked directly at the jury. "I know what I saw," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. "And I know what it feels like to be invisible. He thought we were all invisible. The words hung in the silent courtroom. In that moment, she wasn't a victim. She was the most powerful person in the room. Her simple, honest truth was more potent than any legal maneuvering. Combined with the mountain of physical evidence and the testimony of the rescued children, her words were devastating. The jury was out for less than 2 hours. The verdict was read in a hushed courtroom, guilty on all counts. As the court officer led a pale, shaking Sterling away in handcuffs, the judge banged his gavel, the sound echoing like a final, decisive thunderclap. A large, warm hand rested gently on Maya's shoulder. It was Breaker. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The bolt had been tightened. The machine of justice, for once, had held. The conviction of Arthur Sterling was not an end. It was a beginning. The shockwaves from the trial radiated through every level of the city's power structure. The case had exposed a rot that went far deeper than one man. It became a catalyst for profound systemic change, a legacy built from the courage of one small child. The City Council, facing immense public pressure and media scrutiny, launched a full-scale internal affairs investigation into the city planning department. They uncovered a pattern of bribery and negligence that had allowed Sterling to operate with impunity for years. Several officials were forced to resign, and new transparent protocols for approving large-scale development projects were put into place. One of the new regulations, informally dubbed Maya's Law, mandated rigorous background checks and unscheduled welfare inspections for any construction site operating within a quarter-mile of a school, shelter, or group home. It was a simple policy change that created a new layer of protection for the city's most vulnerable children. Detective Harding, now a celebrated hero within the force, was promoted. He used his new position to fundamentally reform the way the department handled missing children cases, especially those involving runaways. He established a new task force dedicated to these cases, ensuring they received the same level of urgency and resources as Amber Alerts. A core part of the new protocol was a directive to take all tips seriously, regardless of their source. Truth doesn't care about a witness's address, he told a room full of new recruits, a picture of Maya's drawing of the construction site projected on the screen behind him. But the most significant change happened at the community level. The trial had forced the city to confront the uncomfortable reality of its homeless youth population, a problem it had long preferred to ignore. An anonymous benefactor, whose identity was a poorly kept secret within the clubhouse, made a massive donation to establish a new, state-of-the-art youth shelter and resource center. The board of directors insisted it be named Maya's Place. Ms. Albright, the teacher who had been one of the first to call Harding, quit her job to become its full-time director. The center wasn't just a place for a warm bed. It offered counseling, job training, and legal aid. It even had a fully equipped workshop where kids could learn practical skills, like auto mechanics. The Road Guardians became its official and fiercely protective patrons. They mentored the kids, provided security for events, and used their network to find jobs for the older teens. The perception of the club in the city transformed completely. They were no longer seen as a fringe element, but as an integral part of the community's immune system. The changes were not just abstract policies, they were visible on the streets. Social workers were now a common sight, actively engaging with at-risk youth. The old, indifferent bureaucracy was being replaced by a network of care, woven together by the very people the system had once failed. Maya, though she never sought the spotlight, became a quiet symbol of this transformation. Her story was a powerful reminder that the smallest voice can ignite the loudest roar for justice. The ripple effects of her one brave act continued to spread, slowly but surely rebuilding the city's broken trust and creating a safer world, not just for her, but for all the other children who had once been invisible. The legacy of the trial wasn't just about locking one bad man away. It was about fundamentally altering the environment that had allowed him to thrive. A year passed. The seasons turned, washing the city clean and painting it anew. The once feared rumble of the road guardians' motorcycles was now a comforting sound in many neighborhoods, a signal that protectors were near. The world had changed, but nowhere was the transformation more profound than in the life of Maya. She was no longer the ghost of the alley. The thin, haunted girl had been replaced by a healthy, confident 11-year-old with a quick, genuine smile. The shadows beneath her eyes had faded, replaced by a bright, curious light. She was living with Breaker and Sarah in a home filled with warmth, laughter, and the steady, reassuring presence of family. The adoption papers were being finalized, a formality, really, as she was already, in every way that mattered, their daughter. School, once an alien concept, was now a place of discovery. She excelled in math and science, her mind, so long occupied with the complex calculus of survival, now free to explore the elegant logic of algebra and physics. She had friends, she went to birthday parties, she complained about homework. She was, for the first time in a long time, simply a kid. But her sanctuary, her true place of peace, remained the garage. The Guardian's clubhouse had become her second home. She had her own small, meticulously organized workbench in a quiet corner, a gift from the entire club. It was here that the lessons of her father found new life. She spent hours after school with Deacon and Cody, learning the intricate dance of mechanics. She could now strip and rebuild a carburetor, diagnose an electrical fault, and change a tire with the practiced ease of a seasoned pro. Her touch was patient, her ear for an engine's language as sharp as ever. The final scene of this chapter of her life unfolded on a bright Saturday afternoon. The large bay doors of the clubhouse were thrown open, spilling golden sunlight onto the concrete floor. Maya was standing next to Cody's Dana, her head bent in concentration. She was showing him how to properly adjust the air-fuel mixture on his carburetor, her small hands moving with the surgeon's precision. "You have to listen," she said, her voice echoing the words her own father had spoken to her and that Breaker had spoken to Cody. "Turn it slow. You'll hear the engine's rhythm change. You're looking for the sweet spot, where it runs smooth, no coughing." Cody, who now looked at her with a mixture of brotherly affection and genuine respect, followed her instructions carefully. Breaker stood by his own bike across the garage, watching them. He wasn't interfering, just observing. A rare, unguarded smile touched his lips. He saw not just a girl fixing a motorcycle, but a circle being completed, a broken life made whole. On Maya's workbench, propped against a toolbox, were two framed photographs. One was the old, faded picture of her parents, a relic from a life that felt like a distant dream. Next to it was a new, glossy photo taken a week ago. It showed Maya, grinning from ear to ear, sitting on Breaker's motorcycle, surrounded by the entire Road Guardians MC. She was in the center, the heart of their chosen family. Lying on the bench, next to a neat row of gleaming new tools, was the small, worn combination wrench her father had given her. It rested beside a much larger, professional-grade Torquay wrench, a recent gift from Breaker. The old and the new, the past and the present, resting together in perfect harmony. The quiet moment was punctuated by the sound of Cody's engine settling into a perfect, steady idle. "I hear it," he said, a look of triumph on his face. "It's perfect." Maya smiled. "I know." Outside, the open road waited. The brotherhood would ride on, their purpose reaffirmed, their family stronger than ever. The world was still a dangerous place, but it was a little safer, a little brighter, because one day, A group of men on loud machines had been quiet enough to hear the voice of a little girl who the world had tried to silence. A promise, made in the shadow of a rainy alley, had been kept. And for Maya, the future was no longer an approaching storm, but an open road, stretching out toward a sunlit horizon.